All right, James LaFond, you wrote I'd like to think you wrote a good bit of Christian science fiction, not Christian science, comma fiction, as in the Christian science, scientist, but rather you brought Christianity and you brought science fiction. You brought it together. It's kind of like, for me, it doesn't always work well. It's kind of like video games and education. They're mutually exclusive, and any attempts at bringing them together often just doesn't quite work out. But in this case, I think you've made it work. MRE is firmly science fiction, but unique in that it wrestles with Christian themes. I found that examples of Christian science fiction are scant, and like I said, unable to successfully mesh together into allegory. You've provided an inroad with MRE for authors to explore Christianity through a science fiction medium, and I think it works. The conflict between a Christian protagonist and a fallen future world on Mars is apparent. What's your thoughts on Christian science fiction at large? My understanding is that you have tapped into this with other works, and what makes for good Christian science fiction?
Well, I don't know the answer to the last of it, but any fiction is you want to be able to sympathetically, not just empathetically, but sympathetically get into the mind of the character. So it helps if you actually know the person that the character is patterned after. Maybe you've coached them and your job's already to be, poking around inside of their brain, see what makes them tick. That helps a little bit. That's one reason why I chose Sean for MRA, and Drexler's not a complicated individual, so they're ready made to go. Now I have done The Jericho Bone was a book that I did from a predominantly Muslim perspective. I read the Quran 3 times for that.
Wow.
And I also had a Christian character that was a perspective character. The main character was Muslim, Abdal Latif, the beatific image of God, I think is what that means. He was a doctor that wrote about this real cannibal Holocaust in Cairo in 1201. So he was the main perspective character, but Islam never functioned without Christians and Jewish people doing certain things for them. They would use Christians as bodyguards and warriors, and they would use Jewish people for anything from donkey boys to slave drivers to bankers, or what have you. So there's a Jewish character. There's Uncle Ibis, the Christian Abyssinian, and then there's Abdal Latif, the Muslim. So that was my first real, I think that was the best way for me to try to learn doing strictly religious perspectives by putting them together. And it did help that there's some commonalities with these religions and certain places that they had and all. The next thing that I did with Christianity and science fiction was to put it center stage with Beyond the Pale, which is actually about transhumanism, and it's from the Catholic perspective of a tortured subject of a transhuman experiment. And the Greek monk that read it, that I gave it to for free, was horrified by it.
Yeah.
And he probably prays for me every day. Okay.
Right.
All right. He was afraid. Yeah, he thought it was really a horrific thing to read. Okay. So he was at first very thrilled with it because of how I dealt with some saints and angels. Now, another experiment I did with a Catholic science fiction worldview was Prentice Dolphin. A lot of that serialized on my site about 4 years ago, about a man that's not quite a priest or a monk or a deacon. They send him out to the borderland where it's nasty to minister to these people and hear their confessions and so on, even though he's not a fully ordained priest, but he's treated as such. And it's his point of view in a future when there are heathens. It's an ice age, and there's heathens that live up in the mountains of western North Carolina, and there's something going wrong up there.
Right.
He thinks it's like the devil's coming in, that they've actually conceived of the expanding ice as being tongues of the devil, okay, like a dragon that's been sent down to earth. And he's actually going down up there to take a to take a troop of soldiers and with a knight named Justice Claret, who was one of my favorite characters I wrote, to go fight the ice. He's going to preach and doctrinally argue with that ice and make it go back. This really happened in Switzerland in the 1300s.
Wow.
Okay, during the Little Ice Age, priests actually went out there to pray the ice away, and it stopped. So he does not even know that there's any such thing as Protestantism, because this is 600 years in the future. And Protestantism is largely dead as far as people that are reproducing in the Western world. It is mainly turned into secular humanism or even atheism.
Wow.
So I think in a disastrous future, something like Catholicism is going to have a higher chance of surviving, also because it has more artifacts that are not paper. The Protestants, all they have is this and what's in their minds. If a bunch of them die and their Bibles get swept away in a flood, the Catholics at least have these statues and stuff. So I thought that post-apocalyptic situations were going to favor like a Catholic or Orthodox group. And I was raised Catholic, and I've been in a lot of Catholic churches, so I tend to use, for an Orthodox population, the Catholics. I wrote something called Reverend Chandler from a Nordic heathen Amerindian point of view. I suppose that in prisons of the future, during an ice age, that Native American spiritualists and neo-pagans get together and they hatch a new anti-Christian religion. And Protestants have never fought Muslims. They just don't. Okay, even Martin Luther is like, no, we're going to fight the Catholics, and the Muslims can kill the Catholics. We're fine with that. We're not going to go fight the Muslims. Okay, that's been basically Protestant doctrine forever. Okay, in fact, most Protestant churches spend a lot of their money bringing Muslims into the United States. So I thought I wanted to do one in the future where, yes, there's an ice age, but unlike in Prentice Dolphin, you have where a disease had been introduced that wiped out Caucasians that had Aryan blood strains. They were all wiped out. Okay.
Yeah.
Unlike that, what I decided was that Muslims took Rome, and Muslims even landed in Florida. Okay, like en masse, like a new caliphate.
Yeah.
Not like your friendly Muslims that come over and do business.
Right.
And the Catholics are dealing with this neo-pagan Amerindian insurgency in the hinterland, and they're dealing with these Muslims down in Florida and Georgia. And they're just like they're almost going extinct. And most of the Catholic soldiers are Latino or African.
Yeah.
Like they've taken Africans that have been driven out of Africa by the Muslims, and they have legions of African Catholics.
Wow.
And Mexican Catholics, and they're fighting these neo-Nordic guys. So that was my most popular novel, Reverend Chandler. The sequel was Malediction Song, and the conclusion was, it had two titles, Night Song of the Nords and Eye of the Dictator. So what I did is I had the last neo-pagan.
Yeah.
He would get one chapter. Then chapter number 2 was from the point of view of the Dictator, who is the Pope of the future.
Yeah.
And they have lost Rome. All they have is basically North America.
Wow.
Okay, so they're trying to lock down the rest of that. And it's a very grim, and I probably used 30 quotes from the book of Job for that.
Wow.
Okay, so we end up having the neo-pagans and the Catholics have their battle, and at the same time, the Catholics are being overrun from behind by the Muslims. Okay, so it was kind of like what happened in Austria and Hungary and in the Balkans between 1000 and 1687, when the Polish finally showed up and rescued the Austrians because the Germans wouldn't help.
Yeah.
Because the Germans were Protestants. So that's one way that I used that. Now, I did put a Protestant element in Prentice Dolphin, which surprises him because he didn't know. He thought that the only kind of Christian was his kind of Christian.
Right.
He was indoctrinated. He comes out of a cloister, and then he ends up running into evidence of a different kind of Christianity, and they read from the same book. And for that, what I used, my Aunt Madeline, I inherited all her Catholic books and her study Bible, and she belonged to a couple of ladies' societies. The Catholic Church has societies for women that will be dedicated under a certain saint. They'll be sanctified by a pope. Yes, you can have this society of, I've got one she was in with St. James.
Yeah.
St. Christopher was another one. When I was wearing her St. Christopher medal, I wrote, "Wait, Christopher."
Interesting.
Okay, during that. But she had a handbook that was a woman's view. It was Mother Mary's view of the crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
And all the suffering that the mother went through when her divine son was being crucified. So I used that as a vestigial handbook that Prentice Dolphin has. He doesn't even have a Bible. All he's got is this little handbook because he's not even a legit priest. And it's in a neo-medieval setting where, you got like the local parish Bible and that's it.
Yeah.
Not everybody. They don't have printing presses. It's calligraphy. So this is like his little memento. He has this little prayer book.
Right.
Which is really just pseudo-Christian.
Right. It's
okay, but
I was going to say
has.
it's extra biblical.
Yeah, it's all he has.
Yeah.
It's basically his idea of the Stations of the Cross.
Well, it makes me think anyways of there's parts of the world where realistically Christians that are operating underground, they're persecuted, and then they might just have the Gospel of John. They might just have a little fragment of the Bible, and we take it for granted as Christians often that we've got the entirety of the Bible, and we find it hard to get in Bible study twice a week. That's hard to do, and yet these gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen elsewhere are, they're poring over a fragment of the Bible that they hide under floorboards. So you've touched on that. I'm noticing with your Christian science fiction, you're almost taking I keep going back to Werner Herzog, and I know that you're not the biggest fan, but anyways,
because I'm a meathead. I watch movies for enjoyment and education.
Yeah, right. That's that. Yeah, exactly. Education and leisure don't always mix, right? But what I've noticed about you two is that you'll take a scenario, you'll plop a scenario, and then you'll take it to its furthest edges, like where it ends up taking you, and you try to. A lot of your work is like a thought experiment,
Sure.
like what happens if fill in the blank, it's you just throw some sort of a black swan event and these conditions, and then take it through to its finality. And so is that an accurate sentiment? Or,
yes.
Yeah.
And there was different, okay, so this is not overtly Christian themed, but what this is about is it's a time travel novel where you don't see a time traveler. There's evidence of a time traveler.
Yeah.
That people are still trying to figure out who this guy was that warned Stonewall Jackson not to ride down that road because your own men are going to shoot you.
Okay. Yeah.
Who did that? Okay.
But it's probably not important to the story who it is. Okay.
It's important to some of the people in the story.
Right.
Okay.
But to the reader, is it to the reader?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So because it's the seminal event, because Stonewall Jackson's men lynch Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C. in 1862.
Wow.
Or 1863. I just have, it was like immediately after Stonewall Jackson would have been killed. I think it was it was early 63.
Yeah.
He ends up actually taking D.C., winning the Civil War. So you end up with two Americas. You end up with a Union and you end up with a Confederacy. And of course, there's another Civil War, but the Confederacy wins that one too. So
this would be more of like a Harry Turtledove type of.
So I said it in 2013 in a world where the Confederacy won, but the Confederacy won because a really strangely dressed man that spoke a weird dialect of English showed up and then warned Stonewall Jackson and then disappeared.
Wow.
So there's people that still investigate this. And I write this from the point of view of a failed Negro League baseball player who had the worst batting average in the Negro League, who is now a successful carnival operator living in Maryland in the Confederate States of America.
Right.
And he's a well-to-do Negro. He's a colored man. He's a man of color. He even has white employees. He has white men that he hires to interact with other white men. He's doing very well. And then he is abducted by 3 Yankees who are, so the North has become heavily industrialized. They have the NFL. They have like huge diesel pickup trucks with like a single headlight that's like this big in the middle of it. They have heavy metal music. The South doesn't have football. The South only has, they outlawed TVs. They have radios. They have, it's like Cuba. I got the idea with Cuba with the cars. Like the cars all got to be like, before a certain date. It's only antique
or
cars.
Turkmenistan, like there's these weird
and it's not commercial. They don't allow commercials on the radio.
Yeah.
So you have a South that's become a tourist destination for people from the North.
Okay.
So you get these white boys from Pittsburgh to decide they want to go watch the Negro because that's what white boys in the South do, but they haven't done that in 100 years, right?
Yeah.
So this guy has the ill fate. He spends the first half of the book on the back of a pickup truck being hung.
Yeah.
Well, he tries to talk his way out of it with these guys. And then you get a lot of the information about his past and about the world from what happens to him getting lynched. And he actually manages to break a law while he's getting lynched and ends up having to go to prison.
Wow.
Because he broke a law when he was in the process of getting lynched because the blacks had their own police.
So what promulgated all the...
He's Christian and he's praying to God. And then you have these godless heavy metal NFL fan Northerners who are not Christian at all.
Yeah.
They're secular humanists.
Yeah. So this is where you're exploring the threads of Christianity and hedonism within the context of an alternate history with science fiction, certainly science fiction themes. You got the time traveling element, and I noticed there's a subtlety to the science fiction in these works. They're not overtly, flash bang boom.
Like Turtle Dove's like, okay, we're gonna send a truckload of AK-47s back to Robert E. Lee before Gettysburg or something like that. Okay?
Yeah.
And then he writes it from the point of view of Sherman and did an excellent job. But yeah, that's a lot of fun. But realistically, you just need to make sure that Stonewall Jackson doesn't die at Chancellorsville.
Right.
And then it's probably a win for the Confederacy. I ran a lot of tabletop simulations with good war gamers playing the Confederacy, and you can only do it 1 in 7 times. 1 in 7 times, if you're equally matched, you can do it. Okay, it was possible to get a military victory early, and it's also possible to get a political victory late, where McClellan wins the election. Because he wanted peace. So I have that happen the second time. So I have 2 wars, and then I did outline a novel called Rebel Nell, which was going to be about the Confederacy aiding the Third Reich against the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, while the Americans, the Union was sitting out World War II because they were dealing with the Japanese.
Yes. So are some of these books, such as Hurt Stoker and others, do they come about are they born, B-O-R-N-E, through tabletop simulations, some simulation of some sort, whether it's your stocking shelves and writing in your head, or it's around a table of friends, kind of gaming this out to its...
Exactly when I got the idea for this. At the time, I was playing that Civil War game.
Yeah.
Okay. I was walking home from work at 5 o'clock in the morning. I managed to get off work early in Middle River, Maryland, where this is set. And a pickup truck roared by with rednecks in it.
Yeah.
And they threatened me. And they were circling back around to get me. And I was getting fat. And and I was like, wow, I can't fight 3 big young rednecks. I mean, what's going to happen? I forget how I got out of it, but it didn't end up happening. I didn't end up getting beat up by these guys who just recreationally wanted to torment some fat little old man, you know. But then I thought to myself, and at the time it was the summertime, and when I got further down the road, I could see this carnival. There was a carnival set up, and it had all these lights and everything. And I had just been visiting with a guy named Arne Dunstan, who is my youngest son's best friend. He's a light-skinned black man who is extremely successful. And he has such a wonderful personality. He could talk his way out of anything. So I said, okay, what if I just put Arne in this situation? Because he wouldn't have been able to get, I think I snuck like through a backyard or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, Arne couldn't have done that. Arne was like 200 pounds overweight, an immensely fat guy.
Yeah.
But that's what a successful guy was
But
like.
charismatic.
In a carnival area, a successful guy would be a big fat guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was like, how could this guy talk his way out of this lynching while his fat ass is standing up on the tailgate of this Steel City Industrial Motors, you know, NFL pickup truck from hell, right?
Yeah.
And it even had the beer coolers built into it, you know, for driving down to the Confederacy and, you know, snatching some poor blonde lady off the side of the road.
Yeah.
So it was a predatory tourist union, like preying on a backwards South socially, and the idea came to me really when I was seeing those carnival lights.
Yeah.
And this illustration I picked out was very similar to scenery in Middle River, Maryland, where you would see these crows nesting in the trees when the osprey flew by because they were afraid of the osprey. Mm-hmm. But they wouldn't totally give ground. They would just
You've got this beautiful.
And that was just open domain artwork, like in 2015, I think.
That's great. That's really nice.
Yeah, you know, so that was, and I do, I've done some fiction that might not be Christian themed that had, Hood Rat Halloween is about the devil, like coming to the world and tempting people.
Right.
And Skulker Jones was the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, but you still had the idea of the devil as depicted in the Book of Job.
So,
toying with people and testing people.
As I'm thinking about it, so successful Christian science fiction could be a story where you use some sort of science fiction trope by which to explore Christian faith. So an implant in your head. Yes. What are the implications of that?
Well,
right. Cloning, time travel. What if you muck with the continuum? You know, and you try to play God. You try to thwart God's good design in some way. What are the implications of that? And then maybe something that's just a bit more cerebral that has the whiff of science fiction. There's many ways to explore it. You know, I went through a period where I was really trying to think through how does one tackle, like, I would like to write some Christian science fiction, but I found myself very limited. I looked at what was all available, and you have the usual suspects, C.S. Lewis, and that kind of thing. It's like, oh, there's plentiful, but whenever you look at a list, it's C.S. Lewis, and more C.S. Lewis, and then it came to me. There's got to be more, and there's got to be more opportunity there. And whoever really delves into that brings Christianity into science fiction, or any other faith for that matter. You've explored it, like you said. You've explored it with Sunset Saga and the totemistic, indigenous shamanist, sort of thing. You've explored it with, some of your Islam themed works as a studier of humans. There's no rock left unturned.
The literary historian, he was the publisher of the Sumerian newsletter about 20 years ago. I think he stopped doing that, and he wrote a lot of movie reviews for Breitbart. His name's Leo Grin. He let me write at his place for a while. The guy's a genius, and he Now, we were talking about subgenres. I can't stand vampire fiction. I was like, what is it that I can't stand about vampire fiction? You tell me, because you're the critic. He said, there's no duality. God has been taken out of vampire fiction. It's atheistic, and then the top power just preys on people. And it's really boring for anybody with a brain that doesn't have submissive power fantasies.
Right. It's almost like a Quentin Tarantino flick where it's just pure mayhem and bloodshed and just
and mostly humanity's helpless.
Right.
The vampires are so powerful, they're not even interesting unless they fight with each other. So then you end up with vampire soap operas, and people are just cattle.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
So he said, I would be interested in reading a vampire novel if it did not take God out of it, and if it was not effeminate, if it was masculine. I said, well, I could definitely do the masculine thing. And I told Banjo, a guy I was training at the foot of the Superstition Mountains at a ballpark. I'm looking up at these Superstition Mountains. I said, Leo had this idea, a vampire novel, but, God's still in it, and it's not this atheist thing. And he's a Christian, and he said, I hike the supers at night. I wouldn't take you up there because that's a hike that could kill you. The guy's a total stud. He'll go out in the desert by himself and spend the night. He said, I pray when I'm up there, and I talk to spirits because I know they're up there. And he said, I know people have been abducted around here and have never been seen again. And I have had friends who have had people try to abduct them by drugging them.
Wow.
Okay, and he told me
in the Superstition Mountains. Is that what you're talking about?
In the general area, within sight of the Superstition.
I've heard of that. Yeah, people go missing around there.
I said, so I could make this a center for vampirism. And he picked out a bunch of scenes for me. He was like, look at this place. There's no windows. It's an X-rated hot tub building with no windows and no cars in front of it. He's like, anything could be happening in there.
Yeah.
It was different things. So we decided that there would be a vampire. I had to write it in a hurry while I was there because I didn't know the area. I made Leo into the character that's the expert on the vampires. I made Banjo into the action hero, and I made myself into the drunken pot-bellied vampire hunter who is he stays drunk because the vampires are so weak. If they drink alcohol, they'll just pass out. Okay, and they have scurvy. And see, the vampires need trickery because the vampires they're weak. They're deceivers. Like their boss might be powerful.
Right.
Okay, but if you're on the right side of things, he's not more powerful than your boss. And right next to this bar, the Hitching Post Saloon, where we discussed this, there's Apache land that's got a church with a cross right there.
Yeah.
And he said, there's your scene right there where you get to fight the head vampire right there. In front of the church.
Right.
I was like, okay, done. It took me like no time to write that thing. So my niece just published it.
Yeah, so it's
called Blood Hate.
So for you, it's really not.
It was a mission.
It's not a hard thing for you to appropriate any number of ideologies within any number of realms. You can do that.
Be something that I at least investigated. I couldn't do anything from a Hindu or Zoroastrian perspective or anything like that. It's got to be
Zoroastrian would be very interesting.
It's got to be Nordic, Latin, Greco, Christian, okay, or Native American. It's got to be something
that you're familiar with. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would be a time sunk sort of thing to venture forth into a whole other, religion for a book.
Stuff where I've already done the research.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's enough.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That's fascinating stuff, and a topic that is not often explored. You look around for Christian science fiction, and it's really, it hasn't been tapped into near enough. But anyways, thanks, James.
You're welcome.